Hello and welcome to this edition of Bayou Time. I'm your host, Keith Whiteside, licensed clinical social worker. Thank you so much for joining us. However you may be joining us, we appreciate it. We're always glad to check in with local leaders and officials that really take care of people. We're always more excited when they come in. Welcome back to the program, Archie Chaisson. Welcome, Archie.
Thanks, Keith. It's been a while. We've been traveling and just being in the legislature, so it's good to be back with you guys.
Yeah, I know that's right. Y'all have been spent a lot of time really letting our legislatures know what we need, how we need it, and how to go from there, and some successes in those realms.
Yeah,
huh?
very few sometimes, but they the last few weeks have been positive.
Yeah, that's a really good thing. Now, speaking of positive, I know we talk about recovery all the time, and we talk about kind of recovering and coming out of what's been the difficulty with COVID. But today's kind of a special day, and you were able to honor some of those people with C-Corp.
Yeah, so today's the 1 year anniversary of the C-Corp power incident. Had that strong cell of weather come through last year about this time in the afternoon, right? Mm-hmm. And unfortunately capsized that vessel, and we lost 13 people. I think they still haven't recovered, and 19 overall of the 20-some-odd people that were on that boat. So Miss Cindy Roussel, who has been a long-time friend, actually went to school with her kids.
Okay.
She actually lost one of her sons, Blake Terry, to a diving accident. Many years ago, he was diving and never resurfaced on a spearfishing trip. And they formed the Blake Terry Memorial Foundation, and that morphed into what we know today as the Lady of the Gulf statue in Port Fourchon. So if you've ever seen it, it's a beautiful mermaid-esque in the likeness of our Blessed Mother that watches over the Gulf, and it's a memorial to everyone who was lost in the Gulf waters over the years. And unfortunately, there's a lot of plaques on that memorial. And today was, being the 1 year anniversary, they unveiled the plaques of the 13 men that lost their life and were lost to the Gulf of Mexico. And it was, as I put it when we opened the ceremony, I'm glad they came back. It was a moment of closure for them in a lot of ways because they still haven't recovered their loved ones.
Right.
But it was a great way, and it was very humbling and honorful for us to be able to recognize that sacrifice, and to be able to honor their family and their friends in that way. And I always go back, and I told them this morning. I always go back to the book of John when Jesus was out with Simon, and they caught all the fish after a bad day of fishing for Simon, and Jesus looks at Simon and says, "Now you're going to be a fisher of men. And you're going to come with me," at the exact moment when his life had just become enormous, right? He had just caught all these fish to get it back to the dock, and Jesus pulls him away from that. And we often use those analogies of those unfathomable moments and how God uses us to draw them closer to Him. And it was very coincidental, I guess, in a lot of ways that the 1 year anniversary fell on Holy Week, when we talk about Jesus' sacrifice for all of us. And just being able to be there with those families and Miss Cindy and her family this morning was a huge touching moment for a lot of us that were there.
Yeah, and it kind of reminds us that even through the darkness, light comes in the morning, and as we talk about that for the importance of Holy Week as well.
Yeah.
That as we reflect back, and as Lent is a time of reflection, and Easter is a time of renewal. So we're hoping that there was some closure and some renewal and some hope for those families.
And it was really good for me on a personal level, and I tend to, as much as, and we joke about it after we do these shows, right? As much as I can turn the switch on and just talk, those moments are still hard for me. My spiritual gift in life is not evangelization, right? It's not, it's administration and service, which fits what I do very well on a daily basis. But being able to share that moment with those families and really reach into Scripture and whether it touched them or not, I will never know. I hope it did. But it was good in that moment, and it was good to hear Father Greg's message after and again talking about Holy Week and the resurrection and how we tie all of this together into the one big piece that we call life. And Miss Cindy gave a little speech as well and talked about her story with Blake and how the Lady of the Gulf came to be and why it's there. And to hear talk about it surviving Hurricane Ida, that thing that statue took the brunt of everything that was Hurricane Ida, right? And it stood the test of time. It stood there after. In 200-mile-an-hour winds, Our Lady of the Gulf stood there. And she morphed that into how everybody has a story, how the survivors of the C-Corp power have a story, how the families of the ones that were lost have a story. And telling these stories is going to be key to keeping their memory alive for not only their family and their friends, but keeping their story alive for the Lady of the Gulf so that we can learn from it. And we're not going to know what happened for a long time, I think, as the Coast Guard does their reporting. And they look back at the incident, all the data they've been able to collect. But telling those stories of those family and those friends that they lost is huge. And, again, I think it was a great moment of closure for those guys as they got to feel some sense of finality, right? Seeing their names on those plaques, on the statue, and on the pedestal.
Right.
It was a really good morning.
And it gives us some perspective as well as we kind of think about Ida, as we think about, how people have been interrupted, if you will, but not to the severity of that event. And so the one-year reminder of that kind of gives us perspective on how we're doing. Speaking of, how is the parish overall doing as we kind of finish up in this particular segment?
We're doing well, and I use the term normal loosely. There's still a lot of people struggling, and we'll talk about more of that when we get into housing in the next segment and insurance companies. But we began a course with Dr. Nicole Bourgeois, who works for us now in our community service department, with Christine Russell, DA Christine Russell's social services section, and Sheriff Weber's police social services section, to really open up a mental health aspect, right? It's some things we don't think about post-storm. And when you think about coming back and your home is gone, everything you've worked for is moldy and wet. How do you deal with that? And it's something that we're still working with, and we're still working through with those three great agencies and the people that are combined in that committee to let people know that even in the height of all of this, it's okay not to be normal. And we're not going to be normal for a little while, right? As we continue to fight with insurance companies and things like that. But we're getting there. I think we're better every day, and we're much better off today than we were 7 months ago.
Right. And the other thing you talk about, getting back to that normal, and how do we embrace whatever a new normal is, and kind of generate that. Nancy Dietrich came up with that idea, this new normal. And it's something that reminded me as we reflected back on the Vanderbilt kids that were killed in that accident, that new normal. And so it's kind of the same thing with Secor and how they deal with it. It's kind of similar with people dealing with Ida as well. And as we talk a little bit about recovery, I think it's kind of hard to do that without kind of talking a little bit about housing and how people are doing.
Yeah, we've made some great strides in housing over the last couple of months. Our first directive to FEMA was really, look, let's get the units in here, let's get them on people's property, because we knew they wanted to be close to their homes as they were going to rebuild or whatever they were going to have to do, right, as you were gutting it or whatever. So we've just about hit that max point of the number of people who can fit these units in their yards, right? Okay. Whether we're talking the state's program through APTM, the Ida sheltering program, that are really more the camper-style RVs, or whether we're talking the FEMA mobile home units that are, in some cases, 14 by 60. They're 1, 2, 3 bedroom options depending on how you registered your family and how many people you had in your household. So we started to pivot over the last course, somewhere around Mardi Gras, I guess, to some of these larger group sites. We knew we would have to hit them eventually. We gave FEMA in the very beginning, when they started talking about housing, a list of some large landowners who kind of met their criteria, right? They kind of wanted it out, away from neighborhoods, not really close to anybody, because they knew we'd have some neighborhood aspects of people moving in really tight, close quarters. So we had a public meeting, I guess it was a couple of weeks ago. I actually missed it. I was in Washington, D.C. doing some work with, doing a presentation about our post-Ida response to a group of state emergency managers. But FEMA came in, did a real good presentation on how, the environmental side, they looked at how the sites were picked, what the sites were going to look like. And it raised some concerns, not really from the neighbors to a certain extent, but from some of our commercial trailer park owners who that, they had some expandable sites. They had some sites that were open. Could we put those on their property? So FEMA's actually now going back, taking a quick step back and reevaluating some of the existing commercial trailer parks we had, just so we can put those units in there, really scale down some of the group sites maybe. So we're working toward that. I think we're going to get through that this summer, and then really start to build that out. Of course, looking at hurricane season knocking on the door, pre-planning, we're going to have some 2,000, 2,500 people in these housing little units. What do we do with them during a storm when we have to evacuate them? Are we going to automatically pull that trigger and go to Monroe, which is our point-to-point shelter? Or we're going to use our high schools again like we did Ida? And a lot of that's going to be dictated by the path of the storm and the intensity.
Right.
But I'm knocking on the wood of this desk. We're not going to have a hurricane this year, so we're not going to have to worry about it.
I love that perspective. I am so with you on that. That's our Holy Week prayer. That's right. We're not going to have a hurricane to deal with this year. Oh, man, what a blessing it would be to be able to have an additional 6 months or 12 months to recover. Yeah. No doubt.
And look, Keith, the one key part for us is that while we're focusing on all this stuff, right, we still have $107 million of public infrastructure damage. We're also working on new stuff, right? I talked about going to the legislature, working with them on capital outlay projects, on pump stations and stuff like that. We're well on our way. State Representative Reggie Bogala, before he passed away, got us about $1 million commitment on a new pontoon bridge in Valentine. So that bridge is probably older than you and I put together.
Right.
It's been out of service for a number of years. So we've been working with GIS engineering. This is a rendering of what that new bridge will look like. We're pretty pumped up about it.
Wow.
We're about 3/4 of the way there on engineering. The parish is putting up about $4 million all told.
Wow.
The state's going to put up $1 million. We're also working through some grant dollars with a RAISE grant, which is kind of a federal infrastructure grant to be able to do that. But we're really pumped up. It's going to get this bridge back in service. And if you drive LA1 308 a lot through that Lockport, Valentine, La Rose area, if there's a wreck or something weird on LA1 or 308, your bridge options are very limited, and there's a huge distance between those two. So this is also a critical access path for evacuations or fatality crashes where we have to reroute people. We're also going to beef up this bridge a little bit, working with Councilman Otan, who's also the fire chief in Lockport, to be able to put a fire truck across this bridge as well.
Wow.
So in advent of a real emergency situation, they don't have to make that huge 12-mile loop. They can run across that bridge. The other project we're really excited about is the Grand Bayou Freshwater Reintroduction Project. We're doing a ton of work right now with coastal restoration, as you know, post Ida. We can do a lot of with pumping and dumping sediment and building new marsh, but we know we can't sustain it without a freshwater system, right?
Right.
So when you look at what they're doing on the river with diversions, this is our take on a diversion. It's going to be the first mechanized diversion. We're actually going to physically draw water out of the intercoastal waterway in La Rose through this pump station and force it down Grand Bayou.
Wow.
So this is about a $15 million pump station, partially funded by the BP oil spill through the state and CPRA, partially through some GOMESA, the energy revenue we get off from offshore drilling. The parish is putting up about $5 million of our GOMESA money to build this pump station as well. So it's a huge effort. We have a little ways to go on this one. We still have some environmental impacts to work out. Still have some work to do with the landowner of right-of-ways and purchasing property to actually put that pump station there. But we're working really closely with Reggie and Tony and those guys at Terrebonne's Levee District and President Dove. Grand Bayou was severely impacted by Hurricane Ida, silted in a lot.
Right.
So the Levee District is doing a dredge project right now to kind of clear a portion of it out, use it to fill some gaps on Port of Morganza. So what we're going to do is we're working through a cooperative agreement with that Levee District to say, look, the Lafourche Parish is going to pay to keep dredging where you're stopping to be able to clear out that channel ahead of the pump station coming in. We have to do it anyway.
Right.
We have a contractor on site and prices are good. Now's the time to go ahead and do it, right? So those collaborative efforts are really taking off as well.
And I will tell you, I don't know of two parishes or counties anywhere that work as well together than the levee districts, and being able to work with both of them to get that accomplished. Huh?
Yeah. Look, Wendell's been around the block for a number of years. So has Reggie from his days in the legislature.
Right.
And Dwayne and Corey Keefe, who's their board president up in North Lafourche. And then you kind of tack Gordy and I in there as the duo twins, right? It really is a system that works. And it really is a system that has paid dividends, knowing that we've taxed ourselves for all these years, and we're finally seeing the fruits of that tax dollars.
Yeah. What a great and a rather ingenious idea to be able to use that silt and all of that stuff that's kind of plugged up Grand Bayou somewhere else, and to be able to clear that out for getting fresh water where it needs to be.
Yeah, no doubt. It's all part of working energy and the environment together, right?
We talk a little bit about recovery and what it means in so many different facets. Talk a little bit about some of those capital outlay projects and all the work that's being done to kind of improve. Nothing says we're doing well like celebrating Lafourche Parish. And man, the spring has sprung, and despite all these heavy winds everywhere, there's a lot of things going on, a lot of festivals. Let's talk about what people are able to now enjoy again about Lafourche Parish.
Yeah, look, Keith, we got through the beginning of last year a little bit with COVID letting up. Had a couple fairs, very small stuff, and then of course Ida hit, so we lost all the fall fairs, right?
Right.
But next weekend, the 20th, I'm gonna mess up these dates, and he's gonna get mad at me. But it's the 22nd, 23rd, 24th.
Right.
Next Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. La Fête du Monde, which is what we call the Lockport Fair.
Right.
Under Highway 90 at the Central Market Pavilion. It's going to kind of be our first real big fair and festival back. A couple weekends ago, Choctaw had their Fireman's Fair and their parade, which went off
really well.
Went off without a hitch.
Right.
They had
Good,
beautiful
nice
weather.
Yes.
Crowds were packed. I think at one point they ran out of food and beer, which is a huge indicator about how well you do it.
That's exactly right. Not necessarily the patrons that happy if they were still hungry or thirsty, but if you run out of food and beer, you've done well.
They've done well.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, we've had a couple fire departments have their chicken dinners. Raisins, Fire District number 1 had their fair and their chicken dinner and parade, and a little auction a couple weekends ago. So kudos to those guys for getting back out there and serving the community. But La Fête du Monde is going to be a great weekend, great band lineup. Hopefully praying for some beautiful weather. They're going to have a really good auctioneer, so if you want to come out and buy some stuff Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and you don't get tired of hearing my voice on this show tonight, you can come watch the auction.
Yeah, and if you think he talks fast now,
you should wait
come out and see what he can do as an auctioneer. We've heard stories.
But that is a great group of individuals between our fire department, our KCs, the Lions Club, and the Rotary Club down in Thibodaux. Again, Councilman, Fire Chief, Fair Presenter Armin Otan does a great job in leading
absolutely.
that group. Following the weekend after that is the Thibodaux Fireman's Fair, which is always a huge weekend. Stop, drop, and roll in Thibodaux. Kudos to Mr. Danny Cavell, who's their Grand Marshal. I think after 2 years maybe of not being able to have it.
Yeah, waiting. So, third time's the charm, right? Wait for 2 years and this is it.
No doubt. He's going to finally get to don his white tux and his horse and ride through the streets of Thibodaux for their parade. And they always have a huge auction throughout the weekend as well in their auction barn. And then we're gonna have a couple of small things in between. I got to give a shout out to my friends at Nicholls State University and the Alumni Federation. I had the pleasure of serving on that board for a number of years. Their big crawfish boil is the 23rd as well. That's 23rd, Saturday night.
Right.
A huge amount of stuff going on across Lafourche. Cody Gray and Ian and Bree at Louisiana's Cajun Bayou, our tourism arm, does a great job at helping these folks promote this stuff. It's going to be an absolutely awesome spring as we roll through it. Hopefully, again, we get through the summer without any issues, and then we'll crank it back up for the Chag Bay Fair, the Fireman's Fair in Chag Bay, La Fête de Vieuxtemps, which is also under Highway 90 at the Central Market Pavilion,
right,
and Raceland, and then French Food Fest.
That's right.
French Food Fest down in Cutoff Rose,
right,
and then the Hurricane Fest at the Cutoff Youth Center. Ms. Delynn Chaisson does a great job. I think it's early September. She kind of starts out the fall fair season with Hurricane Fest. They missed that last year as well because of Ida, but cool time to be in Lafourche Parish.
Well, and we talk about this, and we've kind of talked about it a little bit and talked around it. We've finally seen these percentage rates of COVID come down to the point that we've really been able to get away from the masking. We've been able to really celebrate being together. We're still a little cautious, still that Omicron's still out there, and we're still dealing with it. But man, it's a time to celebrate. It really is.
Yeah, it is, and we've been traveling a lot more from a government perspective.
Right.
Getting back out to DC, getting back out to different places. And I'm going to pivot away from the fairs and festivals for a minute, but offshore wind is becoming a huge avenue, right? It happened off of the East Coast first. There's a lot of legislation going through the national capital right now about what do we do with those revenues. There was a lease sale off the coast of New York about a month ago, generated $4.4 billion in bonus bids alone, billion with a B. If we see a fraction of that in the Gulf of Mexico, which we think we will the end of this year, first quarter of 2023, it's going to open up a whole host of opportunities from an economic development perspective. For us, Port Fourchon and Chet and his group are going to play a huge role in that. There's a huge contingent of Bayou folks headed up to New Jersey in about a week for a series of offshore wind meetings to figure out how do we bring what the lessons learned on the East Coast down to the Gulf and really what's going to happen there.
Right.
Working with the Department of Interior and being on their offshore wind task force gives us a great position to be able to do that for us. So Chet and I think State Representative Joe Ogeron, who are all on that federal task force, are headed up there as well. So, that the COVID restrictions loosening are a plus, right? Gets us back to really cool things like fairs and festivals. It gets us back to enjoying things with our family again, such as Easter gatherings this weekend.
Right.
But it really allows us to get back out there and travel and really talk about the great things not only happening in Lafourche and Terrebonne, but the state of Louisiana as a whole. And then what is that going to mean for us months down the road?
Yeah, it just allows us to plug in to all of those places where getting some of that $4 billion, really makes a difference for what we can do and where our future goes. Chet and I talk about it all the time. I know you and he talk about it as well. Where do we find that marriage between what we're doing now with oil and gas and how do we transition? And we've got to be able to do those things together and figure out a way to do it, not reinvent the wheel or reinvent the windmill.
Yeah, windmill, right? And look, oil and gas is always going to be key for us in Lafourche and in Louisiana, and I don't want to downplay that by any means.
Right.
But, with the administration we have now on a national level, you got to use those buzzwords, right? And if wind's the ticket of the day, and I think it's going to be a long-term ticket. It's not just going to be we're going to do this while President Biden's in office, right? It's going to be a long-term revenue stream for us. Then let's go down that road. Let's see if we can help people like Nanos and Gulf Island who have a ton of experience in the offshore market. Can we transition into that ultimate energy source where Lafourche Parish becomes the nation's energy hub, not just the oil and gas hub?
Energy overall.
No doubt.
Some great vision. And the one thing I did learn from these last few minutes with you, we're not expecting any hurricanes this year for 2022. God, that's
me
what
to it,
we're
right?
asking. God, it's what we pray this Holy Week. Archie, always appreciate you coming in.
Good
Thank you,
seeing
my
you, Keith.
friend. Thank you so much. All right, guys, that will do it for this particular segment of Value Time. Don't go anywhere. A lot more local programming here on HTV.